Thank you for joining us for this exclusive question and answer session with Dr. Emily Lovegrove, otherwise known as the Bullying Doctor. Emily is a psychologist who specialises in developing successful anti-bullying strategies. She's a popular speaker and trainer in the area, as well as being the author of the books Help, I'm Being Bullied, and more recently, Autism, Bullying and Me. She has very kindly agreed to give us some advice on how schools and alternative provisions can tackle bullying in their settings. So, Emily, thank you for joining us. How are you today?
I'm fine. Nice to be here.
Fabulous. So thanks again for joining us. As I'm sure you are aware, Anti-Bullying Week starts on the 16th of November. The theme this year is United Against Bullying. Now, many children report instances of being bullied at school, either physically or emotionally. Perhaps we should start by defining what bullying actually is.
Okay, well, every school has a legal obligation to define how they understand bullying. Most go along the lines that it has to be deliberate and repeated. Actually, often it is neither deliberate nor repeated, so that kind of muddies the waters a little bit. And you have things like there has to be an imbalance of power. And again, that can be difficult if, for instance, you have a much larger child who's being bullied by a group of smaller kids. So yes, you need those definitions, but actually we need to keep them very fluid, because what we know is that it doesn't matter if you fit those criteria for bullying issues or not, it has exactly the same effect on pupils. So they feel emotionally distressed, they withdraw, they have all those stress reactions, like their heart's beating fast, their energy is going into their feet to run away, or their fists to fight back, or they're just freeze, which takes a lot of energy too. So we need to be aware that there can be outright bullying and there can be perceived bullying. It has the same effect on our pupils.
Fantastic, thank you for clarifying. So Emily, I've got some other questions here, and I'll start with this one. What advice would you give to a school leader who is looking to set up an anti-bullying programme in their setting?
Right. It's a massive undertaking to set up an anti-bullying programme. The ones that are really successful are the ones that take the opinions of everybody that's likely to be involved. So you absolutely need your head teacher on board, for instance, or it won't work. You need to involve the school governors, all members of staff, pupils, parents, your caretaker and cleaners and dinner ladies, all your support staff, and even, if possible, neighbours of the school, the residents who live around it. If there was any way you could get everybody more or less on board with a system, you are well over halfway there to having a system that will work. What happens in, for instance, some Scandinavian countries is that they have a whole school approach that is set up this way, and they also are checked on to just tweak it and make sure that people are still sticking to it at yearly intervals. So systems that are set up with the best will in the world and then just left are likely to become much less effective over time.
That's interesting. So, I mean, as an ex-teacher myself, I know how precious time is, especially with trying to do online and in-person learning for a lot of students at the moment. So bearing that in mind, and we know that bullying does take place up and down the country in many schools, what can teachers and other school staff do on a practical level to help prevent bullying, and perhaps in a way that doesn't eat into the lesson time and the PPA time, that makes it difficult for them then to implement? I don't know if you have any tips along that side.
Right. Well, one thing that we do know is that pupils who are stressed and anxious do not learn. So actually, this idea that we mustn't eat into the time doesn't work, because you can prepare the best, most interesting lesson, and if a proportion of your pupils are not ready to learn, they won't learn, and the likelihood is they will disrupt the session for the rest of the pupils. So that ends up with everybody, including teachers, being really frustrated. So I would say that, as a matter of course, taking that first 5 to 10 minutes of your lesson to get your class actually ready to engage is really important. At the moment, virtually all pupils are stressed. They are all anxious. They don't know what's going to happen. A lot of them are terrified that they're going to catch COVID and pass it on the family members that they love. They are anxious because parents are losing their jobs, or their parents are arguing more because they're stuck at home, and they're anxious. They're anxious because possibilities of jobs grows less and less each day. So I think we do need to take a bit of time out of every lesson, even though I totally understand this idea that we have criteria to get to. One nice thing to do is to sort out how the class feels, to acknowledge that lots of kids are feeling anxious, and to say to them, lots of us feel anxious and miserable. How do you think that affects us? Spend a couple of minutes on that negative. Spend a few seconds modelling what that looks like if you have kids who feel stressed, anxious, angry. How does that look? And you can tell, this is how your kids are feeling. They are absolutely fed up, or they're just resigned. What is the point? What is the point? They've stopped GCSEs, everything. I can't see a point. Ask them how they could change that to something positive for this lesson. Encourage words like, we are, but we're just going to take the next half hour to find out about this in case we need it in a test, or in case this is going to be useful. We are going to take the next half hour to support other people in the group because we know everybody's feeling stressed. That makes a big difference. I'm going to try, and I'm part of a team. We're all going to try and do this for each other, including the teacher. And that will doing things like opening up the windows, saying to kids, okay, everybody stand up, take a really deep breath. Oh, fantastic. And sit down. And let's do another one. Those are good things for relieving the pressure too. They're not huge, but it's just a way of getting kids to engage with the lesson, because we all feel bullied by COVID. It's terrifying. And the things that we need to make it doable are positive, clear messages, which we're not getting. Absolutely clear strategies, we're not getting those either. So we're all feeling stressed, we're all feeling bullied. And that way of changing our narrative and saying, just for the next half hour, we're going to feel this way. We know we've got all these awful things going on, but just for this, let's all go forward together, help each other, see how far we can go. And I promise you it will make a difference to the kids' learning experience. And you as a teacher who you know your stuff, you're good. It's just getting kids on board.
Absolutely, yeah, really useful, thank you. I know one of the things we've been doing at home, my son's much younger, so trying to do mindfulness and breathing techniques can be tricky. And one of the things we've done is we've watched a YouTube video about pizza breathing, where you pretend you're holding a piece of pizza and you breathe in like you're sniffing it. And then you're going to blow on it to cool it down. And that, just to try and get that right action of breathing and the sort of depth that would really help, I think, kind of really oxygenate and help people to feel calm.
You know, I think some schools use mindful techniques, mindfulness, and that can work. I would prefer a guided meditation whereby you tense up all your muscles, groups one after the other, and then relax them. And then take a couple of deep breaths and take a second to imagine things are okay, and then start. That's 2 minutes. It's so quick and easy. So that is another technique. I agree with you. That's another one I would use. And the pizza breathing is just wonderful. I love it.
Anything to get it to appeal to my son, to be honest. It's not easiest to get on board with things like
I think it would appeal to an awful lot of kids. I think it's a brilliant idea. Thank you.
I've been trying to get him to tell his friends about it because he can get angry easily. And I'm like, calm down, everything's okay. Okay. How about the students themselves? You know, if they are feeling bullied, either by other children or by a teacher or by anybody, or indeed by inanimate things like a virus, what advice would you give them personally, you know, for handling it when they're perhaps not at home and they're at an educational setting instead?
Again, I would go back to that thing of how you feel about yourself. So acknowledging how you feel at your worst, recognizing how that changes how you look, that you may look angry or depressed or withdrawn, and that will have an effect on how others see you. And it's such a sad thing that when we feel really miserable and we present that face to the world, often others are not, they don't actually engage with that. They kind of go, oh God, what's rather than, oh, what's up? How can I help? And certainly in a school situation, that can be hard, particularly for boys who don't have those conversations by and large. I know that's a sexist way of putting it, but we do know statistically that boys tend not to have those conversations with one another. Although I hear it's improving, which is lovely. So being able to take on board the things that you do feel positive about can often change the way that you look. It changes the way that other people see you, and they are more likely to engage. And then at that stage, you can say, actually, I feel really fed up. You know, this has happened, that's happened. So it's giving yourself a fighting chance of opening up that conversation.
Interesting, thank you. And in light of COVID, you mentioned COVID already, But it means a lot of communication, a lot of learning is taking place online. And I think, you know, more and more of us are sitting in front of the computer than ever before, and children in particular. Yeah. So, I mean, it brings the conversation around to cyberbullying and online issues. So, I mean, if a child feels that they are receiving perhaps hurtful or damaging messages online, it might be more difficult for them to handle that situation. Have you got any thoughts or advice that might help?
Well, the first thing is to parents to keep the lines of communication open with your kids. You can say, you don't have to make it personal. You can say things like, God, I heard the most awful thing about this kid who was being bullied online. You know, and people were being really horrible. Does that happen much in your school? So it's a very generalized way of keeping the conversation open. When kids become teenagers, their job, as it were, is to fit in with their peer group rather than be part of that tight and relatively safe family circle. I do know family circles are not safe for all children, but in the main, they are seen as safe. And so if you're being bullied online, the temptation is to keep it to yourself as a teenager and not tell anybody. Very often as parents, I think we don't like to think of our child being bullied, and therefore bullying is seen as, I don't know why people think if you talk about bullying, it'll happen. You know, the more information we have on bullying, the more able we are to understand it. I spend huge amounts of my time explaining how bullying works. It's not magical, the facts are there, and we know how it works. We know how it keeps going. So knowing what's happening, knowing that bullying is rarely personally directed at you, but at something you represent. I have yet to meet a bully who wasn't themselves bullied. And this happens, you can see it happening incredibly clearly in the political world, where I'm trying to keep this neutral, but in two countries that we all know awfully well, we have leaders, one on their way out but one still firmly in place, who were bullied by their fathers. Both had violent fathers. And we know that the outcome is not good. I think increasing our understanding that bullies are people who themselves feel bullied stops it being that angry, they are evil, we are perfect conversation, which helps nobody. I'm not saying we shouldn't get rid of politicians who are clearly not good. What I am saying is having some understanding helps to heal the rifts that are there, encouraging our children to see that those who behave in a way that seems reprehensible may have their reasons for doing it, and finding some positive things so that at least the conversation can go forward. Wars rarely solve anything. The after effect of a war is horrendous and should be avoided if it's at all possible. So really, parents having those conversations, parents learning what bullying is, learning how to cope with bullying. And I know it's a shameless plug, but reading books like mine that explain what it is and explain lots of easy ways to help yourself I didn't choose the title of my book, Autism, Bullying and Me. I would have preferred it to be Teenagers, Bullying and Me. I wasn't able to change it. It's a book which you could just go through a chapter a day. It's 10 minutes with a child to open up those conversations. I've had lots of emails and comments from teachers who have used it with classes and said they'd done, 3 or 4 of them contacted me to say they were doing a chapter, a lesson with pupils and just opening up those conversations on bullying and coping, and that they had been really well received. It's written as if for a dyslexic teenager. So the language is simple, it's clear, and I just think the more information we've got, the easier it is to deal with things. The information is out there, so it's all positive.
Yes, a trainer once said to me something that has stuck ever since, and that was seek first to understand. And I think that very much echoes the sentiment that you're communicating, and I wholeheartedly agree with it. I think it's easy to assume that someone's being negative towards us without perhaps realising that we have our own filters and our own reasons for interpreting their behaviour, or they have their own reasons for behaving in that way. And I think that's, it's incredibly important to realise that not everyone exists in our world, and that can really help. I was going to follow up by asking how children can get more information if they feel that they need support. But actually, I think you've already mentioned your book, and it does contain a lot of really useful practical advice, and I think it can speak to a lot of people. I don't know if there's any other resources or places that you would like to mention that people can get support if they feel they need it as well.
If young people need it, Mind, so www.mind.org is another source of information. They're really good. They have, telephone numbers. If you look it up, that you can phone up and get information about bullying specifically for young people. And you do not have to be autistic. I'm going to hold my book up. That is something that's got lots of answers in it.
Absolutely. Don't think because I'm not autistic I can't use that book. It's still
it's not aimed at, it mentions autism, but essentially it's for all young people and families, so that you increase your understanding, your knowledge base, and you learn nice ways you can go forward.
That sounds amazing. So before we finish up then, Emily, is there anything else that you would like to add, or have we just about covered it, do you think?
I think you've just about covered it. Thank you for fantastic questions.
No, thank you for your time. I realise that with Anti-Bullying Week round the corner, you're inundated with requests, so we were honoured to have your input for the Axcis YouTube channel, and I'm sure this will be on our social media channels as well next week. So I will, without further ado, let you crack on with your day, and just say thank you again for your time. It really is appreciated.
Oh, thank you for having me.